Welcome back, boys. Today we have one from Moon. The moment Joe Rogan finds out his guest is compromised.
Joe Rogan has had thousands of episodes posted, and for the most part, they're all just fairly normal and interesting. But occasionally, somebody will go on the podcast with a hidden agenda, using his platform with ulterior motives. Or there's just something else going on, a hidden narrative that shows a guest and their views are compromised in some way.
You know, you got the director of the FBI on this show saying there's no, if there was, nothing you're looking for is on those tapes. Like, what?
Sometimes it's really obvious and you can see Joe tweak onto this. Sometimes you have to be paying attention to really sense this out. And other times it takes real digging to understand what's going on behind the conversation.
Would your wife know your ATM PIN code? No?
No.
Is that your ATM PIN code?
Yeah. That's weird.
Like we saw with the Paul Stamets episode. Now, Paul Stamets is a great guy. He's one of the leading mycologists, generating a whole new wave of interest in nature and specifically mushrooms and mycology. He's written books, runs a successful company, sells supplements, and has worked with government biodefense programs since 9/11. Paul has been a regular on the podcast, but when he joined Joe Rogan for a second time, we got one of the podcast's most mysterious moments. But there were more dimensions to it than most people realized. Deep into a conversation that touched virtually every aspect of mushrooms and fungi, Joe casually mentioned portobello mushrooms, and suddenly Stamets' entire demeanor changes after he explains that portobellos have a problem. Joe was completely caught off guard here.
What are the negative benefit or the negative effects of this?
This is an explosive area of conversation, and that puts my life in danger. So I reserve the right not to answer your question.
Whoa. I didn't expect that. It puts your life in danger talking about portobello mushrooms?
But what was this strange reaction actually about? As Stamets clearly hints that portobello mushrooms are not as healthy as many think, especially if you don't cook them at high enough heat. The leading theory is that portobellos contain compounds called agaritines, which can convert to potentially carcinogenic substances. Interestingly, in his most recent Joe Rogan appearance, Joe never brought up this infamous moment again, one of the most talked about exchanges in the show's history. In fact, portobellos aren't even mentioned once in the entire conversation. But why? If it's just that it can lead to cancer, wouldn't this be good for the public to know about? Well, we have to dig a little further. You see, Paul Stamets is on record discussing portobello's dangers. Back in 2006, he had previously stated that eating raw portobellos was analogous to smoking, but worse.
It's a unique chemical that's in button mushrooms and portobellos.
Who eats mushrooms?
They're very much analogous to smoking a cigarette, except the agaritines cause tumors all over your body as opposed to just in your lungs.
Now, you've got to admit the magnitude of the original reaction itself comes across as surprising. Wasn't it just as simple as saying they're dangerous if you don't cook them properly and move on? Well, in hindsight, it seems like Stamets might have swerved the topic as he
I hate like mushrooms or anything. Like any mushroom, I just don't. It doesn't taste good.
didn't want to harm the $50 billion global market.
So if he had spoken ill, head would be rolled.
Over which he has a major influence. Some even joked about the Portobello Mafia, which sounds absurd, though organized crime groups have allegedly controlled mushroom production for decades, especially in the state of Pennsylvania where over half of US mushrooms are grown. But there seems to be a deeper and darker layer to Stamets' shocking reaction that most theories are missing. You see, it turned out that he was once close friends with Stephen Hayden Pollock, who was also a notable mycologist that was murdered in 1981 under highly suspicious circumstances. Pollock was running illegal prescription operations to fund his mushroom research when someone shot him in the head during what appeared to be a robbery. Detective work found solid evidence pointing to 3 suspects, but the district attorney refused to prosecute for unknown reasons, and all 3 suspects died as free men. But the case gets even stranger. There's allegedly a recording that captured police officers discussing their own involvement in Pollock's murder. A drifter had stolen a tape recorder from an unmarked police car and traded it for wine at a liquor store. When the owner played it back, he heard what sounded like a cop and a burglar talking about killing the mushroom doctor. But the tape sat hidden in someone's toolbox for 30 years because they were terrified the corrupt cops would track them down and kill them too. When a journalist tried to investigate in 2013, the DEA claimed they had destroyed all the files. And this wasn't Stamets' only brush with dangerous research circles. In his latest podcast, he revealed that back in the 1970s, he was organizing secret underground conferences with the world's leading psychedelic researchers: Albert Hofmann, Gordon Wasson, Terence McKenna, and Richard Evans Schultz.
I was the only one that had a DEA license, so we did these conferences collecting all these experts together with Albert Hofmann there, or Gordon Wasson, Richard Evans Schultz, Jonathan Ott, Terence McKenna. But I had the license to be able to possess psilocybin with my professor, and so we would have all the psilocybin. So we did these educational events, academic with citizen scientists and psychonauts coming together. But it's really different. We just had the Psychedelic Science MAPS conference in Denver, 8,500 people. Back in the 1970s, at any moment, we were afraid that a SWAT team would break down the doors and arrest everybody.
He was the only one with a DEA license, making him a central figure bringing together the most controversial scientists of the era, and they were operating in a high state of paranoia because at any moment they were afraid a SWAT team would break down the doors and arrest everybody. So when Stamets says that discussing some mushrooms could put his life in danger, maybe he's not exaggerating. He's seen what happens with inside the government. He's at the top of the government research with mushrooms. And he's also seen one of his top mycologist friends get murdered, and then the entire case getting buried away, whether by organized criminals or someone else. And by organizing secret meetings with controversial researchers and dodging the law, he's probably still deeply paranoid about certain mushrooms. But whatever the truth is, it made for some awkward but interesting viewing. But that same thing can't be said for everyone. Like in June 2025, with FBI Director Kash Patel appearing on Joe Rogan and spending nearly 20 minutes explaining why everyone should just accept the official Epstein story and move on. A lot of us have creative ideas that never see the light of day because we feel like fancy equipment, a studio and production crew is what makes a creator. He told Rogan that he'd seen the prison tape and the case was overall pretty benign, with very little else left to expose. Some way into the discussion, Elon Musk randomly dropped a bomb live on X. Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That's the real reason they haven't been made public. Joe Rogan reads this tweet out loud and the camera captures Patel's face as he realizes he's trapped. His response?
But I'm just staying out of the Trump Elon thing. That's way outside my lane.
Says the literal director of the FBI who was conducting their investigation into Epstein. Kash Patel has shared a lot about Mr. Jeffrey before, though not in the way you'd expect for an FBI employee, let alone the director of the entire agency. Just 2 years earlier, he was publicly demanding for the client list
This is like so sus. Where's the list?
to be released.
Simple, because of who's on that list. You don't think that Bill Gates is lobbying Congress night and day to prevent the disclosure of that list?
He's even been on a bunch of Q podcasts with over 50 appearances, stating things like Q has been right about so many things. One of his books is literally titled Government Gangsters, The Deep State, the Truth, and the Battle for Our Democracy, which explores FBI corruption. Before becoming director, he vowed to shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopen it as a museum of the deep state. But after he got the job as the head of the FBI, he clearly morphed into a completely different person. In one hearing he said, "I have publicly rejected outright Q-baseless conspiracy theories." All in all then, it would be fair to say he's hard to trust, and his discomfort on Joe Rogan is obvious. He's constantly looking away, fidgeting and struggling with eye contact. He discusses his pre-FBI days as a lawyer where he says he defended child traffickers.
This is what we call a war of experts. And I used to do it all the time. I mean, I represented some of the worst humans that you can possibly imagine on Earth. Literally. The guys that were trafficking children from Mexico into America.
Think about that. While talking down the accusations, he casually mentions defending some of the worst people in the world to support his point. This guy went from demanding transparency to shielding it when given the power to provide it. The FBI Epstein investigations recently concluded, with the Bureau stating that investigators found no incriminating client list or any credible evidence that anyone was blackmailed.
Yeah.
There are no plans to charge anyone else involved in the case, and everyone knows how bad this really is. and how much deceit is really going on behind the scenes. It's just so obvious that it's almost impossible to ignore. And notice how they say incriminating list, which doesn't necessarily exclude the existence of any list whatsoever. This aligns with the expectations Kash Patel laid out in that podcast. The official line was dictated to Joe Rogan before being released to the public. But Kash Patel is certainly not alone among current and former intelligence officers who have had tense and weird exchanges on Joe Rogan, though some are arguably more discreet and hard to discover. But among the so-called glowies, a term used to describe government agents that make public appearances to shape narratives in some way, Mike Baker is probably the most interesting candidate to appear on Joe Rogan. He's a former CIA officer who has become a Fox News contributor, appearing on Joe Rogan's podcast approximately 20 times. But calling him former CIA might be generous, as they say there's no such thing as an ex-CIA officer. Baker doesn't exactly lie to Joe Rogan's audience, but instead he runs what intelligence professionals call limited hangouts, revealing partial truths to establish credibility while concealing deeper secrets. I mean, listen to how he does it here, passing off accusations of CIA interference in overseas politics.
Of course that's what we're doing, right? Of course we're trying to influence hearts and minds. Of course we're infiltrating organizations to try to influence the direction of a government that...
Or this classic where he confesses to stealing state secrets.
It's like John Brennan, who was a director at the agency. He talked about the business of the CIA and says we don't steal secrets. God damn it, of course we steal secrets. That's the point of the exercise, right?
The technique here is admitting to controversial CIA activities while framing them as obvious and necessary. He simultaneously satisfies truth seekers while completely normalizing the entire enterprise. He takes the sting out of revelations by acting like everyone already knows. Of course we overthrow governments, of course we still stay secrets. What did you expect to hear? But Baker isn't just some retired spook doing podcasts for fun. He's still very much in the game. As the CEO of Diligence LLC, an alleged CIA front company, he sits on the board of Newbridge Strategies connected to the Bush administration, and his company has ties to
I haven't seen this.
to former CIA Director William Webster. That's why people in Joe Rogan's audience always notice that whenever he's on, he'll just speak so vaguely, in generalities, deflecting specific questions and always having a reason why he can't go into details. He comes across as down to earth enough to seem relatable, and he's skilled enough to reveal partial truths while protecting the deeper, darker secrets. When foreign policy gets messy, Baker appears to put the reasonable CIA perspective out in the public sphere. And with so many visits on the Joe Rogan podcast, he takes every opportunity he can. I mean, isn't it weird that he's been on over 20 times at this point? And that phrase glowies comes from the idea that federal agents and intelligence operatives glow in the dark, literally. They're obvious once you know what to look for, and Baker practically has a neon sign above his head to Joe's audience. David Grush is another former military guest on Joe Rogan, and his credentials are comprehensive with 14 years of experience in military intelligence, including positions at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office. He was tasked by Congress to investigate UAPs for the Pentagon, so when he comes forward as a whistleblower, people listen. On Joe Rogan, David talks about retrieving what he called non-human origin technical vehicles, meaning spacecraft, and claimed the US government has been running crash retrieval programs for decades.
So it's like once you realize the phenomenon's real, then you realize we've recovered artifacts and, biologics or, dead pilots.
I want you to notice something. Every time something incriminating happens, let's say government, like the Epstein stuff, every time something big news about something like that comes up, suddenly there's, UFOs and aliens are real. Oh, the World Cup in this sport is happening. Oh, this crazy thing happened. They always try to make some kind of new story or news to kind of like shift focus from like the real. Don't ever forget the list. Always be on that. No matter what Trump or anybody does, remember the list. That is what matters. It's incredible to me to see that when something big happens, something important, they come out with some garbage. Like, aliens are real. Oh, this is crazy. Look at this. Garbage.
If you will, even though it's kind of creepy to even think about that in your worldview, you don't think they were ever alive sometimes too, right? And I'll leave it at that.
He talked about alien technology and recovering biologics, essentially dead alien pilots from these craft. He said there's been a sophisticated disinformation campaign to hide all of this, and that we're in a Cold War with other nations to reverse engineer alien tech. It was wild stuff, and David is making these claims under oath to Congress, which lends him huge credibility that most UFO witnesses lack. However, it also raises questions: why now? Why is a military intelligence officer suddenly revealing all of these alien details? This all comes at a time when UFO fans and skeptics alike are discussing how the US government could be covering up experimental weaponry programs. After spending 3 hours with him, Joe himself later suggests that the guy might be a useful idiot, being fed information to serve a larger agenda, like high-tech drone programs.
How do you know whether or not they're just using him as a useful idiot to just get out some silly story because they're covering up for the fact that there's some very advanced drone system that the United States government has that they're trying to keep under wraps?
Right.
Joe does, however, hint that it could be both things. UFOs exist, but the US is also using them to cover up advanced US technology. One thing is for sure, that people like David confuse people, which can benefit the government in itself. There's plenty of history that makes using UFOs to cover for military operations feel plausible too. A recent Department of Defense review found that in the 1980s, an Air Force colonel visited a bar near Area 51 and allegedly gave the owner fake photos of flying saucers, sparking UFO rumors around the already secretive military base, and the goal was to cover up the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter. Many weren't happy with David being dismissed as a charlatan or part of a government-led UFO psyop, rather than an honest whistleblower. But something doesn't quite add up. Either he's revealing too much or not enough, or the timing is suspiciously convenient. Another guest, Dr. Zahi Hawass, was the total opposite of David. He came on Joe Rogan and somehow managed to make ancient Egypt, one of the most fascinating civilizations in history, sound completely dull. The doctor is Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities, essentially the person responsible for overseeing access to all the pyramids, tombs, and archaeological sites. He's been the face of Egyptian archaeology for decades, appearing in countless National Geographic documentaries with a signature Indiana Jones hat. The secret of Egypt and the mysterious origins have become a massive talking point, especially popularized by Graham Hancock. So you'd think he'd be the perfect guest for entertaining some theories, and especially rebuttaling all of Graham Hancock's theories that have become mainstream on Netflix and have included celebrity appearances. But when Joe brought up the possibility that the Sphinx and pyramids might be older than traditionally thought, the doctor shut it down immediately.
What do you think the arguments are that predate, that try to push the date back of the construction of the pyramids?
I never heard of this.
You've never heard of this before?
No, it's only new. It's a theories from the new age.
But I saw a debate with you. I saw a debate with you and Graham Hancock, and there was another archaeologist.
That was
But hold on. The other archaeologist was saying, if you're saying that something happened 10,000 years ago, where's the evidence of any civilization from 10,000 years ago?
Exactly.
But then you found Göbekli Tepe. So Göbekli Tepe was buried over 11,000 years ago.
That's not true. I never heard about this.
What do you mean it's not true?
It's not true what I told you.
What is not true?
It never happened.
Tepe?
We never discovered this at all.
Wait a minute. Göbekli Tepe is in Turkey. But this was the evidence. Hold on.
No.
This is the evidence in the argument. The argument was there was no evidence of an ancient civilization from 10,000 plus years ago. This is before the discovery of Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe gets discovered known to be more than 11,000 years ago. That changes everything. Because now we know. Yes, it does.
That's changed
hold on. Because now we know there was an advanced civilization capable of a spectacular construction 11,000 plus years ago.
Look at the archaeologists. They never talk about old civilization.
That's not true. Göbekli Tepe is universally accepted as being more than 11,000 years old.
I am talking now about Egypt. I'm not.
No, I understand, but the argument was that there was never any ancient civilization capable of spectacular construction 10,000 years ago.
When Joe mentions satellite imagery showing potential hidden chambers, he just calls it bullshit.
I investigated.
Yeah. I've seen this. I've heard about it. There are tunnels, right? Somebody did like a drone thing. Somebody mapped out something. Apparently, there is some kind of tunnel, but I don't know.
This. I took this techniques that they used and I gave it to expertise. And they said, these techniques cannot show underneath a solid rock.
But these scientists are saying they can. Do you know about the Osiris shaft? How they've got
I
scanned?
discovered it.
You did, right?
Yes.
But do you know that they use this tomographic
No,
radar and
no, I am the one who found it. This is not.
No, I understand you found it.
His favorite response to any question was essentially because I investigated it and I found it's wrong. When pressed for details, his response returns as the answer is in my book.
I will tell you.
You will tell me how it was built?
Of course.
Okay. How do you know?
How do you know?
How do you know?
I found all the evidence of building the pyramid. We published a book, 1,000 pages. This book is the Bible of the pyramids of Giza Plateau.
Throughout this conversation, you can hear the frustration building. Every question was parried or deflected with something like, I figured out everything interesting about Egypt. The irony is that he's supposed to be this great communicator, but he comes across as the kind of academic gatekeeper that ancient history skeptics love to hate, and constantly just trying to sell his own book. Whether intentionally or not, he reinforced every stereotype about mainstream archaeology being closed-minded and dismissive.
Most of the information that's written on pyramids are wrong.
Most of it?
Most of it.
In archaeology books?
In archaeology books.
Really?
Except me and Mark Lehner.
You guys are the only ones that have it right?
Because I have been working in Giza for the last 57 years of my life. I excavated every bit of sand.
And Joe Rogan later referred to this podcast as the worst one he ever did.
Was this the pad that Zahi was using? Right here? This one?
Maybe. That might have been the worst podcast I've ever done. But maybe a good one, too. Just to see, okay, this is the guy, this is this closed-minded fellow that's been in charge of gatekeeping all the knowledge about
And
Egypt.
still standing on the same ideas.
Another Joe Rogan guest with seemingly compromised opinions was Adam Conover from the show Adam Ruins Everything. This one's striking because he built his whole career on questioning things and debunking myths. Now, to add a little context, his character ruins popular ideas because he believes that the truth is always better, bringing up awkward facts to annoy other characters in the process. So you'd think he'd be comfortable with someone pushing back on his ideas. But when Joe starts asking some basic, controversial questions, Adam seems genuinely surprised, as if he wasn't accustomed to anyone ever disagreeing with him. They eventually get into the infamous discussion about sports and gender, and Adam makes the argument that men only dominate sports because men invented the sports. So Joe asks why basketball was designed for men specifically.
So many of the sports were designed for male bodies, right? They're optimized for male bodies, right? Basketball, for example, right?
How is that optimized for...
This dude lost me. Like, what? Because men created the sports. That's why they're better.
Male bodies.
It's like
What about swimming? I'm pretty sure people who have went swimming for a long time before it became a sport.
the height of the basket, you know, the way that the ball moves around, you know, like if
the way the ball moves around.
If we're gonna say that,
he even seems to realize how he sounds because he starts laughing right after saying it. The whole conversation had this vibe of someone who was used to people just nodding along with whatever he said, going along with the LA narratives. And when Joe would press for details or ask for evidence, Adam would often say that he wasn't an expert. It would seem like he was almost forced into having these opinions, knowing how ridiculous they really were. The discussion about trans athletes was where this really showed. Joe laid out a detailed argument about biological advantages, 30 years of testosterone affecting bone density, tendon strength, the mechanical advantages of male hip structures versus female ones. But Adam's response was always just flat out disagreement.
This is a conversation, this is something I'd love to talk about on our show, and I'd specifically love, you know, this is the kind of topic where I really want to make sure that I know the research and that I'm, you know, also speaking to trans folks, you know, in this conversation. But
throughout the conversation, he kept name dropping his trans friends like he was calling in reinforcements, as though he was forced into giving this narrative. After the podcast, Adam immediately went on Hassan Piker's stream and complained that Joe...
He turned it immediately into a boxing match.
That either means he knew his arguments looked flimsy or that he wasn't conveying his own opinions well. Adam Conover represents this whole class of supposedly independent intellectuals who've really just been captured by academic orthodoxy and forced into saying whatever companies want them to say, to virtue signal as much as possible to always look morally virtuous. He presents as someone who questions everything, but he really only questions things outside his own ideological bubble. When those core beliefs are challenged, he falls back on appeals to authority and identity politics. Many others on Joe Rogan have been outed for covering for political or institutional agendas, and one of the most infamous being Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the chief medical correspondent from CNN. We've brought up this before in a previous video, where Joe brings up how CNN had described his COVID medication as horse dewormer, when he'd actually gotten human ivermectin prescribed by a doctor. Thousands of medications can be used for both animals and humans. You'd only choose to label it like this if you were taking a shot, as they did by editing his recovery video. So Joe asked directly,
Do you think that's a problem, that your news network lies?
Well, I don't.
Dude,
what did they say?
They lied
What did
and
they
said
say?
I was taking horse dewormer. First of all, it was prescribed to me by a doctor.
Yeah.
Along
They
with
shouldn't have said
a
it was
bunch
horse.
of other
if it was-
medication.
and Gupta actually admitted, so Joe pressed further.
Why did they do that?
I don't know.
You didn't ask? You didn't think that was yours? You're the medical guy over there.
I didn't ask. I should have asked before
But they
coming
did
on
it
your
with
podcast.
such glee.
No,
Yes,
Joe.
they did. I watched.
So here's CNN's chief medical correspondent admitting on the world's biggest podcast that his network lied about Joe's medication. And you would think that would be a pretty big deal, right? Well, the very next night, Don Lemon was on CNN defending the horse dewormer characterization.
Ivermectin is a drug that is commonly used as a horse dewormer. So it is not a lie to say that the drug is used as a horse dewormer.
Which is a classic institutional gaslighting tool. Technically true, but completely missing the point. Then there was Dr. Michael Osterholm, who joined in March 2020 with remarkably accurate predictions about COVID.
And just illness. In fact, I brought some numbers. We conservatively estimate that this could require 48 million hospitalizations, 96 million cases actually occurring, over 480,000 deaths that can occur over the next 3 to 7 months with this situation. So this is not one that to take lightly.
And he was largely right. The US hit around 400,000 deaths by January 2021. The conversation was interesting because of how specific his insights were. He'd written a chapter about China being the source of the next pandemic, and when Joe asked about it, the doctor said he picked it specifically because he expected it to come from there.
China's been a bacterial and viral soup vessel for a long time. That's again why we have to protect ourselves here, because a bug anywhere in the world today can be a bug everywhere tomorrow.
His organization has been partnering with Homeland Security since 2003. His book Deadliest Enemy came out in 2017, 3 years before COVID. This was back when Joe was still very much pro-establishment on vaccines at the time of Osterholm's first appearance, making many arguments that resonated and sounded reasonable at the time. When he returned to the show in February 2022, the dynamic was then completely different. Joe was now a COVID skeptic, and this was evident in the conversation.
That it seems like this is coming from a lab, and these were credible people from legitimate universities. And then you had some other people that were trying to say, we need to disparage these people, and we need to look at them as if they're fringe conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, I think in the early days that happened in a way
Why would that happen?
I can't comment. I wasn't part of that discussion. I did not get involved with that discussion because
With Osterholm remaining consistent despite Joe probing the pandemic from a more skeptical perspective. But it's these strange and controversial moments that have really helped make Joe Rogan so culturally legendary, where ideas are truly stress tested, as within 3 hours you can start to really pick up if you're observing if someone truly has a hidden agenda.
I mean, for some things, like large amounts of money are involved. To be careful, they have to be.